Yes, I have a very interesting article from Wired in front of me. The article is titled Billionaires See VR as a Way to Avoid Radical Social Change. So let's scroll down a little bit.
Tech oligarchs are encouraging the creation of virtual worlds as a cheap way to avoid problems in the real one. Now, I do have a small interest in um, VR. Like, there's a cheaper set that's like $300, but even maybe without that, I could at least like put my modeling architecture expertise to helping others who do know what they're doing into making virtual spaces. So there's
That
like
would
kind of an
be
interest
That'd be
turned on to
really
that.
cool. Like if you were to design like virtual architecture, to design like virtual spaces that people could exist in VR, that would be really interesting.
Yes, it is, and so like it would entail that I learn Unity. So there's a lot of steps and man hours involved. So it's kind of on the back burner as an idea, like many others. Like I have all these other kind of small business ideas. Like for
Right.
example, last week I made pickles from scratch for the first time. It
Huh.
was pretty easy, and when I shared them with my friend, he's like, "This is the third best pickle I've ever had," and they are delicious. They came out great. I was surprised how good they came out. And I'm like, you know, if I made like a case of like 24 case of these, I could probably sell these at the co-op. It's like I should, do there's no pickle seller. Well, maybe there is at the farmers markets, but not one in Albany. But like we need that kind of like we need each kind of food stuff. There needs to be someone making it in Albany. It would never cover the whole city, but like, that should be the goal. That for a small city of 100,000, there should be somebody or some collective making pickles that everyone can get. Everyone who loves pickles, and my nieces love pickles, so there you go. Um,
All right.
but
So
yeah,
let
so
me
there's a
let me go forward with the article.
yeah for
So, sorry.
mhm.
The future of virtual reality is far more than just video games. Silicon Valley sees the creation of virtual worlds as the ultimate free market solution to a political problem. In a world of increasing wealth inequality, environmental disaster, and political instability, why not just sell everyone a device that whisks them away to a virtual world, free from that pain and suffering? Tech billionaires aren't shy about sharing this. Some people read this the wrong way and read incorrectly into it. The promise of VR is to make the world you wanted. It is not possible on Earth to give everyone all that they want. Not everyone can have Richard Branson's private island. Doom co-creator and former CEO of Oculus, John Carmack, told Joe Rogan during a 2020 interview. People react negatively to any talk of economics, but it is resource allocation. You have to make decisions about where things go. Economically, you could deliver a lot more value to a lot of people in a virtual sense.
So like most rich but butts. Anyway, butt hats. They He kind of confuses that people's needs or desires are that everyone live like a millionaire, when really we just want basic healthcare, housing, and so on. Like when it comes to luxuries, yeah, we want to be able to earn those ourselves, feel like we earn them. But when it comes to basics to live, that's that's the allocation that we're kind of talking about. All right.
So, virtual reality is an attractive escape, but it's not a solution to the world's ills. The problems
This is the writer, by the way. So the last paragraph was
was a quote.
the founder of the founder of Oculus.
The problems of the real world will persist beyond the borders of the metaverse created by companies such as Epic, Valve, and Facebook. Without decisive and radical action, our planet will continue to burn. The gap between the rich and the poor will grow, and totalitarian political movements will flourish. All while some of us are plugged into a virtual world. Worse, The virtual world will be one owned and controlled by the companies that create them. If you want a picture of the future, imagine if Facebook branded set of VR goggles strapped to an emasculated human face.
It's
Forever.
emaciated, which means like
Oh.
starving.
Oh.
Bones. Emaciated.
By the principle of the free market Silicon Valley lives and dies by, virtual reality is a loser. Only 1.7% of Steam users have a VR headset, according to a December 2020 hardware survey. And while it's true that sales of headsets are up during the pandemic, roughly 30% in 2020 over 2019, video game sales in general are up overall. Valve released Half-Life and Alex.
She's the female character.
Okay, Half-Life Alex in March 2020, just as the lockdowns were beginning. This was the first Half-Life game in 13 years. The continuation of a franchise fans have been desperate to play for more than a decade. It sold well for a VR title, somewhere north of 2 million copies, but it didn't match the incredible numbers of 2020's top-selling titles and was quickly forgotten by the mainstream press. Unless you're really into VR, you probably weren't talking about Half-Life in 2020.
I mean, most gamers aren't talking about Half-Life in 2020. I mean, I think people stopped talking about Half-Life in 2012.
Yeah.
As a gamer myself. But anyway, the Half-Life fan base is quite fanatic.
The reasons why are obvious. First, virtual reality is expensive. At the high end, Valve's premier headset, the Valve Index, costs $1,000. On the cheaper end, Facebook's Oculus Quest 2 is $299. To play Alex, those headsets need to be wired to a high-end gaming PC. The price of these machines vary, but something that can handle VR will cost around $1,000. Once the machine is built and the headset hooked up, the player will need to carve out a dedicated physical space to play the game. Most games require a minimum of 6 feet by 5 feet, but the more space you have, the better. VR requires an incredible amount of cash and free space to set up properly, and the headaches don't stop there. Right now, it reminds me of the early days of computer gaming. It works most of the time, but I've spent hours tweaking settings, adjusting controls, and reconfiguring hardware in a desperate bid to achieve the optimal experience. Cash, space, and time is no guarantee that you'll enjoy VR games. Some people experience nausea and vertigo in virtual reality. Sometimes you can overcome this by properly adjusting the hardware or slowly exposing yourself to the technology. Some people get their quote-unquote VR legs and adjust. Others never do. Setting aside VR sickness, the technology is incredibly inaccessible for differently abled people. The industry made huge strides towards making video games accessible to a wide range of people in 2020, but virtual reality, with its bulky headsets and strange controllers, is simply impossible for some people to use. But all these problems can be overcome. As Carmack mentioned in his Rogan interview, tech companies will drive down the cost of the headsets. Moore's Law may be crapping out in terms of absolute performance, but we've still got a lot of price performance that can drive out, or that we can drive out of these things, he said. We can have virtual reality devices that can get cheap enough that lots and lots of people will be able to have these.
You know, if you have a certain income.
Right, of course. So Carmack was explicit about the importance of tech companies pushing virtual reality. Not everyone can have a mansion. Not everyone can have a home theater. These are things...
Not everyone can have a home.
Yeah. These are things...
That's the unsaid
right.
part.
These are things we can simulate to some degree in virtual reality. Now, the simulation is not as good as the real thing. If you are rich and have your own home theater or mansion in private island, good for you. You're probably not the people that are going to benefit the most, he said. Most of the people in the world live in cramped quarters that are not what they would choose if they had unlimited resources. This is absolutely true. Most people in the world lived in cramped quarters and would choose not to. But Carmack's solution is to create a virtual world where people can escape. It's a promise of a future where living conditions are still cramped, but people have accepted their material conditions and retreated into a fantasy world created by tech companies. So this whole article is ignoring the basic fundamental fact that VR is not an acceptable alternative for those whose basic needs are not being met. If your basic needs aren't being met, being showed a virtual image of those basic needs will not meet those needs.
I mean, maybe like in some eventually like the solution to homelessness will be to, because buying a house is too expensive, or providing single occupancy units.
Right.
We'll just provide a $300 VR set. Once the computing power is just in the headset, we can give each of the homeless guy, mostly men, but it's also women, one of these sets, and then they can live in the street, but then believe that they live in a house.
Oh my god.
That'll be it. That'll be the solution.
Oh my god.
Now, this is all aside from other different conversation of not so much concern, but like, so like in my vision of like, if I were to develop my VR skills, my ability to use Unity and craft spaces, maybe I don't buy the headset myself, but I would probably, because I watch videos of the guys kind of using it and experimenting with it, where they use like the basic tool set to make a VR version of their living room that is slightly better than their current living room, because it's maybe a little bigger, or it has a virtual view of nature that they don't have normally, or it's in a video game, like the video game rendering, Halo, but like, so my vision is like, so we have Zoom chat meetings where it's just face to face. What if we're all in VR using kind of video or avatars, but we're doing so in a communal assembly space where we are in fact kind of more interacting with each other. We're in an interactive space. But then that's kind of like, then it's like, again, then it's like, is this not just well, as far as like isolation, necessary isolation, that's good. If we get to a place where we're mostly vaccinated, or we're able to manage the spread of these super viruses to the point where we can, at least in local communities, actually interact and then conglomerate in places, we should be building these communal meeting places anyway. We should be rehabbing our buildings. We should not be letting our urban cores rot. Doing everything possible. So.
All right. So, do you want me to continue with the article?
Tool as it gets there, but like, as long as it's going to be controlled by Valve, it's like I'm not really cool with that. I mean, as far as a career, like I could get on the ground floor, and that's kind of the allure I'm being pitched. But it's also just like not the career. It's not community building career that I want.
Yeah.
But it's part of it. It's part of it.
Do you want me to continue?
Yeah.
All right. So it will not stop at just screens and speakers. Elon Musk is working on a brain-machine interface called Neuralink. Similarly,
means it won't work.
Right. Similarly, Valve's Gabe Newell is heavily invested in creating the literal Matrix. Quote, "We're way closer to the Matrix than people realize," Newell told IGN in 2020. In a televised interview with New Zealand's One News, Newell was explicit about creating a world where brains and computers interface, and computers are able to make changes to the brain. He even called the body a meat peripheral and further dehumanized the physical form. You're used to experiencing the world through eyes, but eyes were created by this low-cost bidder that didn't care about failure rates in RMAs. And if it got broken, there was no way to repair anything effectively, which totally makes sense from an evolutionary perspective, but is not at all reflective of consumer preferences, Newell said, sounding like a cartoon villain.
He
For
absolutely is. I mean, this is the perspective of like the post-humanists of like the goal of the super rich here is like because they can imagine it because they have it all right in front of them, is to put their consciousness into robots,
right.
and that's kind of what he's talking about. Like, yeah, let's stitch these meat bodies. But yeah, it's totally
So
cartoony. It's exaggerated. I mean, that's what kind of wealth does. It exaggerates negative or sometimes monstrous. But
yeah,
also, I mean, it's assumed that it could also exaggerate like empathy and other types of things, but of course it doesn't.
yeah.
Carry on.
So for Newell, the goal is to create a fantasy world better and more fascinating than the real one. Quote, so the visual experience, the visual fidelity, will be able to create. The real world will stop being the metric that we apply to the best possible visual fidelity. He said the real world will seem flat, colorless, and blurry compared to the experiences you'll be able to create in people's brains.
Well, I guess it will be if it is a complete hellhole and everything
Yeah.
is like on fire. So I guess it will be, but self-fulfilling prophecy.
So if all this sounds like a nightmarish future vision where the world burns around us while we retreat into fantasy worlds, you're not alone. There's this piece of art that goes around the internet of this dystopian kid in the corner drooling with goggles on with rainbow pictures, and it's a terrible looking place, Carmack told Rogan. And people say this is the world you're trying to build, people plugged into virtual reality and ignoring the world around him. Carmack's response isn't encouraging. Is his life really better if he takes them off and he's in this horrible place? He asked. I live in Dallas. It's 100 degrees there. We change the world around us.
Not anymore.
And all that we do, we live in air conditioning. People don't generally go, oh, you're not experiencing the world around you because of air conditioning. That is what human beings do. We bend the world to our will. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a Facebook-branded VR goggles set strapped to an emaciated human face forever. So for Carmack, virtual reality is a path to making the world a better place. That's how the world gets better, by building technologies and distributing them to people so that they have something better than they would have had if it didn't exist.
Some people,
Some
20%
people,
of
right.
people.
Exactly. Well, that assessment of virtual reality ignores several fundamental lessons we've learned about technology in the past few decades. Far from liberating the world, technology has introduced new methods of control into our lives. Power changed hands as Silicon Valley came to dominate our lives. Facebook, Google, Apple, and Amazon wield an incredible amount of control over our lives. And much of the power they wield is occultated. Or occluded?
I'm not actually sure.
I don't know
Keep
how.
reading. I'm going to look up what that word actually. Put it in the dictionary.com.
All right, for the listeners at home, this word is spelled Occluded, and
I got it. You can just finish up reading
the rush to create digital worlds ignores both the harsh realities of the physical and the ways we might all be manipulated if tech companies control not just the apps we use every day, but the very world we inhabit. Look at Epic. Hey Dan, okay, your audio is quite loud. There's just
well, I turned the mic. I turned the mic off, so I don't know. Interesting. Okay. I think it's basically a synonym of. So occluded is a synonym of kind of what do you call it? Obfuscation or So to occlude, to cause or become closed or obstruct, prevent passage. Yeah, pretty much. To obfuscate, to make opaque.
Huh.
Basically,
right.
Their power is unseen, right? It's not. We don't feel it as like a jackboot,
right?
On our face, like the reference of like the imagine the future. That's a 1984 reference, by the way.
Okay, so let me just quickly finish this. So look at Epic, whose Fortnite is lauded as the first metaverse. Far from being a land of unrestrained freedom and partial palaces for everyone,
Palatial. That's the
palatial
word, palatial.
palaces for everyone, Fortnite is a popular video game that sometimes hosts impressive live events while slowly selling its inhabitants goofy costumes. Virtual worlds will be molded in the image of their creators, not their participants. Already, landlords are dividing up real estates in the blockchain based metaverse Upland. When Apple and Fortnite go to war, it's their users who suffer. Virtual worlds can be anything we want them to be, but Silicon Valley sees them as a place to push digital mansions and movie theaters on the hoi polloi. It would be a simulacrum, an ersatz world like ours with the pain edited out. You could bet they'll charge top
dollar.
Yeah.
So
that was a cool article.
There's one side of like the dystopia going on.
Yeah.
Of it, and they're just like when they're asked, they're very forthcoming about what they're doing.
Right.
So, but they don't see the strings that they're laying out because they're just making money and so on. Because they do have to continuously generate profit and more profit, growth of profit. Go to the Jinquisition, a Facebook journalist, a YouTube video game journalist who is MB. They're not transitioning, but